What is going on, my planting people? Let's talk Hoya. This right here is my Hoya Krinkle 8 and it is by far the largest Hoya in my collection. I bought this plant as quite a large plant to start off with, and it hasn't disappointed. In that whole time since I've had this plant, it has been growing absolutely non-stop, and it is by far the most prolific bloomer in my collection. This thing never fails to disappoint when it comes to blooms. We have one just here, and the tip of that shows me that it's going to go into bloom any second now. We have a few more blooms as well, like this one just behind this leaf. This looks like it's about to bloom, and all of them are showing signs of that. I think this one is probably going to be the first to bloom. If you look at that, it is really coming into itself. You can see that the buds are starting to really swell up, so that's a good sign that it's going to bloom. I've said this before and I will say it again, although this plant loves to bloom, I'm not particularly fond of the smell. To me, it smells a bit like licorice, a little bit earthy, soily, almost a little bit like manure, I've said before. So when this plant does bloom, as much as I am excited for it, I know that in the evening when the smell is the strongest, that it's going to take over the house. So I just sort of lock it away in the living room so I don't have to deal with that. But apart from that, it is proven to be a really solid plant, really resilient. This plant hasn't had any pest issues with me in my care. It is also really easy to look after, I would say. It doesn't require a lot of water, just like a lot of other Hoya. So this plant can go completely bone dry before you need to water it again. The leaves can go really soft and wilt. And even then I won't panic, because I know that after good watering, it will plump back up and the plant will just keep on going like nothing happened. So the Hoya Krinkle 8 is an absolutely wonderful plant. Really do enjoy growing it in this sort of hanging basket, watching it cascade down. It's the only Hoya that I've had that can actually continue growing this bushy, this thick, whilst growing downwards. Most of the other Hoyas that I have, once their tendrils start to droop, they'll stop producing any new leaves on those tendrils and trying to find something to climb up on. But this one doesn't seem to matter. You can see that, although I've said that it starts to thin out at the bottom here, but before that happens, you've got a lot of leaves to sort of grow and enjoy. So the Hoya Krinkle 8, I would 100% recommend it if you're new to growing Hoya. It is almost bulletproof, and yeah, it grows really quickly and can really be a statement plant in your collection. This is the Hoya Finlaysonii. Now, when I last showed you this plant back in the summer of last year, I had cut down the mother plant because the leaves started to look a little bit worse for wear. So I stuck them into my grow tent just to let them root out for a bit, and they did really well. And it's only a couple of months ago, maybe 1 or 2 months ago, that I decided at the start of spring, I'm going to repot these back into soil, move it back out into the lower humidity room, so it doesn't have that high light, high humidity levels. And you can see that the plant is starting to sort of push back on me for that. We have some yellowing leaves. I've even had to cut some just back today because they were looking really terrible. You can see that over there. But despite that, the plant seems to still have some good leaves on it. So I'm quite hopeful that now that we're approaching the warmer summer months, that this plant is gonna just continue to grow and continue to really take off. I really enjoy this plant and I wanted it for a long time, and it is because of that venation on the leaves. Just check that out. It almost looks a bit fake. It doesn't look like a real leaf, and especially when you touch it, as with a lot of Hoyas, it's got that real cardboardy kind of texture to it. It's really tough. It's not soft like other leaves. It takes a bit of pressure to even try to bend this, but I'm sure if you bend it too far, then the leaves will break, so try not to do that. So now that I finally got my hands on this plant, I would really love to grow it into something like the Hoya Krinkle 8, which is growing behind me, something really bushy. But unlike that plant, this plant does not like to grow downwards. Just as I said before, once this plant starts to grow down and it doesn't have that support, it will stop producing new leaves and it would rather throw out a new tendril. I'm hoping I can find a nice little trellis just to sort of get this thing to grow in and to be really happy. So the Hoya Finlaysonii, a beautiful plant, one that I'm probably still learning how to care for properly, because as you can see, some of the leaves are looking a little worse for wear, but still up there with one of my favorite Hoya in my collection. This is another Hoya that I tried to rescue, and I'm glad to say that it's been successful, very much so. This is my Hoya Obovata, another prolific grower. This thing, it doesn't stop, it produces leaves all of the time. Now, I remember this plant, I can't quite remember why I chopped it up. I think the leaves weren't doing that well. Either that, or I suspected that it might have some soil-based pests. I did take the plant out and I removed all of the roots. I soaked it in hydrogen peroxide. It was definitely some sort of root mealy bugs that this plant had, and it was the second time that it came down with it. So I decided, let's just start from fresh. So after doing that, I propagated the plant into several different cuttings, let it root out in water, I believe, if my memory serves me right. And when they were all very well rooted, I then decided to root it up into some really thick, chunky soil. And the plant has been doing well so far. I've been growing this plant in a room that isn't heated over the winter whilst it's been in soil, and it's been doing quite well actually. When I went on holiday, I'd sort of put a plastic bag over it just so that it wouldn't dry out that quickly. And I just kept that plastic bag on for months after I came back from holiday. And the plant didn't seem to mind. In fact, it's now starting to look like it's putting out new growth on basically all of the growing tips. All of them, you can see that sort of a reddish color there where some new shoots are gonna emerge. So I think this plant is a powerhouse of a grower, much like the Krinkle 8, and I can only use that as a comparison because it's just so much of a faster grower than any other plant that I have. But the Hoya Obovata is very different to other Hoya just because of that disc shaped leaf, those massive round leaves, and I really do like that because it's just so different, so unique, right? Although I do have some that are growing in a bit like the what's that heart-shaped kerry eye, I believe it is. But I think they share some of their ancestry, their sort of parentage is very similar. But apart from this plant being the only one that's ever come down with some sort of pest in the roots of root mealybugs, it's been quite a strong grower despite that. So, you know, it would show signs that it's starting to slow down, but it never declined. So another strong, resilient plant if you're somebody that's dealing with those types of pests and you need something that's a bit stronger, then the Hoya Obovata is the one for you. The rarest Hoya in my collection is probably this one. It doesn't look like much, but this is the Hoya Clemensiorum. I think it's also called like the dragon Hoya or something similar, dragon scale Hoya or something. And that's because when this plant grows to maturity, the leaves look really, really prehistoric. You can kind of make out what I mean by looking at the ripples on the edge of this leaf, if the camera will pick it up. And when it matures and it grows really, really big, those become even more pronounced, really wavy, really, really prehistoric. And again, I guess the dragon sort of element or nickname for this plant can be seen because of how the venation kind of resembles a little bit of like a crocodile's back, that the scaly texture of that. Again, this is a plant that, you know, I've wanted for a long time, and when I finally found one for a relatively low price, I decided to buy this one. If you'd seen my video last time, this plant was probably a little bit bigger. Can't quite remember what it was like back then, but I have propagated this plant a few times, and I think I had about 4 or 5 cuttings, all of them rooted really, really well. And this, in fact, is one of those cuttings. The mother plant I sold off, but this plant has been a relatively slow grower since propagating it. These are the only leaves that I've had. I think we have signs here of some new growth on the growing tip there, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I don't think I'll get too many leaves on this in this growing season, but you know, one can remain hopeful. But the Clemensiorum is an absolutely gorgeous plant, really elegant with those sort of, well, at this stage anyway, with those slender long leaves and those veins that really, really make it look really prehistoric and just really interesting to look at. By far, my favorite Hoya has to be this one. This is the Hoya Wilbur Graves. Just, I don't even have to say too much. I can just let you look at this plant and just take in just the beauty of this thing. Look at those top leaves where we have a little bit of sun stressing. You can see a slight pink tinge to it. Sometimes the sun can get a little bit too much, like with this leaf here, where we have just a little bit of a blotching there where it probably got a little bit too warm. But despite that, I don't think this plant can do anything to make me angry, to make me mad. This plant has never shown any signs of wilting, of dropping its growth or anything like that. It's just such a solid grower. I've been growing this plant in pond, and I would usually leave a little reservoir of water in here, but I've completely stopped that. I've changed that approach with this plant, and I've water it in like a regular house plant. So just let the water flow, make sure that it's got a good soak, and if whatever little bits of water is left in here, I'll leave it in there so the pond can really try to soak that back up, just to make sure that it's really well watered. But despite that, the plant just doesn't mind. It doesn't mind being a little bit thirsty. In my experience, because it's growing in pond anyway, you know, if I do leave a little bit of water in there, the plant doesn't, you know, start to throw a tantrum and lose leaves or slow its growth. Of course, over the winter, I haven't seen much growth from this plant because it's a bit colder. I'm sure as the days get a bit hotter and longer, this plant is going to start to explode in growth again. I've had to wrap this plant around this trellis a few times, which is why it looks so bushy. So it's a fast grower. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous plant. I am a sucker for variegation, and when you have leaves like this that are almost fully variegated, there's one up here that's even more so, and that one even has a bit of the sun stressing on there. When you have leaves like that, what more can you ask for? I'm hoping to increase my variegated Hoya collection, and this plant is the reason for it. Look at it, look at it, look at it. Oh my goodness. This is what remains of my Hoya Latifolia. Now, I don't know if you've seen that previous video where the mother plant just started to decline and really was hit hard by that cold weather and the fact that it was so close to my window. I managed to save just one cutting from this plant. In fact, I'm not sure, I haven't checked the cuttings upstairs, but some of them are starting to root, others are sort of looking the same. But this is the only one that has really rooted truly, and I can tell because if you look here, that red growing tip will tell you that it's starting to grow and push out some new growth. Oh, look at that, I didn't even notice. Look at those roots at the bottom here. So yeah, very well rooted. So this is what I'm going to use to restart my Hoya Latifolia. So two things I look for in Hoya is just like variegation, sort of the size of leaves, and you know, venation as well. So those things combined make it a really interesting proposition. But this one's got two of those things. It grows quite large and it does develop some splashing as well. So I'm going to try to give this one exposure to some bright light, and we'll see what that variegation is going to look like under those circumstances. But hopefully when I show this plant again, it will have some beautiful growth and it will be a lot like the mother plant that it came from, just massive and with lots of vigor and growth. So with that said, this is the Hoya Latifolia. This is another rescue plant. This is the Hoya CV Jennifer. Again, it's another one that took a nosedive during the winter, which is quite odd because it was, I believe, one of my first Hoyas that I ever got. And it wasn't particularly close to a window. It was directly under a grow light, so you got good access to light. But for whatever reason, it took a downturn, and I took some cuttings, and this is the one that's looking the most promising. So since I've put it in here, I haven't had it decline. I can't see any roots at the bottom, but it does appear to be growing. I can't see any new growth on it, but it's still, the leaves are solid. That's a good sign. That means it's rooted. Can't see anything, but hopefully it does take off and I can restart that plant, because it's the one that got me into Hoya in the way that I did. I didn't think I would be as interested as I am in Hoyas as I am now, but this is the one that started that journey. So hopefully, fingers crossed, this plant can take off. The Hoya Callistophylla, here it is. This was one of the OGs. This plant, when I first got into plants in a big way, and I started looking at Hoyas, this was the one that always showed up. And it took me a while, but I eventually got my hands on one in a plant trade. It looks exactly the same as I showed it to you last time, in that it only has one leaf. But what you haven't seen is in that time it grew another leaf around the same size, and then it lost it. It just sort of fell off. I'm not sure why. It's not an overwatering issue as far as I'm concerned. I can see on that stem just here where my finger is, it looks like some new growth. So there's still a chance that this plant will put out some lovely leaves, and I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed that that happens quite soon, just to make this plant a bit more bushy, a bit more appealing as well. Because at the moment, I don't think I'm a fan of this one leaf Hoya look. I like them to be bushy, big, and really filled out. So hopefully that happens quite soon. The Hoya Villosa on the other end though, this thing is a beast. It is lovely. I think last time I showed it to you was massive, right? It was huge, but I've propagated this plant a few times, and every time I do so, this plant just sort of explodes again in growth. I think I need to keep doing that, because how I find this plant grows is that it sort of grows really nicely and compact at this stage. So maybe the next leaf might be quite compact, but then afterwards it just sort of throws out a tendril, throws out loads of leaves, but it gets really long and really hard to control, especially with the leaves this size, you know, the size of my palm. They're huge. There's so much to say about it. It's got that unique leaf growth, it's got those veins, and something else that it has that the other plants don't have is the texture. It is ultra fuzzy. It's such a nice feel in the hands. If you're somebody that like to sort of go around touching your plants, feeling them, making sure that they're okay, this is the one for you. It feels so nice, and it's that kind of fuzz that it doesn't freak you out. I know there's some plants like the philodendron with the fuzzy petioles that can look a little bit creepy, especially to me, but this one, it's just like a nice little fuzz that you will find on like a teddy bear or something. Really nice. And also, as I said, it's a really fast grower. If you can contain the growth or put it in a trellis, I think this will make you a really happy bunny as well. And I don't think I've had this flower before, but I remember looking at the flowers online and they did look quite interesting as well. So it's a bit of a double whammy, right? So you can enjoy the leaves and then you can also enjoy the petioles and the flowers when they emerge. So this is it, the Hoya Villosa. The Hoya Mathilde is unique because of its smaller, very splashy leaves. You can get some that have a lot more splashing, and those I think look even more special than this. But this has been a real gem to grow, really fast grower. I think I got this plant as a 2-leaf cutting, and since then this thing has grown and it's continued to grow. It's exploded in growth. You can see from the baby leaves just here that this thing just doesn't stop. It just continues growing, and for me, I just wrap it around itself like so, just to contain it a little bit and to just to have that bushy effect, that bushy feel. But this plant, a lot like the Krinkle 8, I find, doesn't mind growing downwards a little bit. We will test that theory with this tendril. I've just noticed actually we've got these leaves here which are quite new, but right at the bottom just here we also have some other leaves that are emerging, some budding leaves. So this plant is really resilient, have had no issues when it comes to watering. It's not particular, doesn't mind a little bit of underwatering. This plant has survived, unfortunately, some overwatering as well, where I've watered it and I've forgotten to empty out the cash pole. But even then, it's shown it's just not bothered really. It just continues to do what it's going to do. So another one that I would recommend for a first-time Hoya owner or enthusiast, it's amazing, right? And you can have it in this small growing container, especially if you're tight on space as well. This one can sort of slot in almost anywhere. The Hoya Mathilde. The Hoya Bella, an infamous one. I think this is quite popular. I don't know why it took me so long to get this one. In fact, I actually got this from a trade from a good planty friend. So this one is just doing amazing. It hasn't done a lot of growing actually, but it's got a lot of staying power, right? When I first got this plant, it was only a couple of weeks later that it started to bloom, and I've just noticed it's very tiny. Very tiny, but in between those two leaves there is a little bloom that is going to emerge soon. This one is known for its blooms. I think it's got quite an interesting smell, very sweet if I remember correctly. So I'm really looking forward to growing this one to a really bushy one. I've seen other videos of people with a Hoya Bella and it's massive. It's almost like the Krinkle 8, massive blooming things, and it's got like their leaves hanging all over the place, and because it's got this sort of growing pattern where it sort of goes straight and out, so almost similar to this one, whereas the Krinkle 8 kind of flows downwards, this one kind of goes out and then down. It's got a bit more texture to it perhaps as well. This one is actually doing okay. I think it's coming into life now. We got some new growth here, a new tendril that is about to come off the main plant. This is a new tendril as well from the last time that you've seen it. So we're doing some stuff, it's growing. Hopefully now that we're approaching the summer, hotter months, that this thing is going to explode in growth and really sort of start to pick up. So we'll see about that. But the Hoya Bella, another one to add to your dream Hoya collection, because it's just an OG, tough plant. You can't go wrong with the Hoya Bella. The Hoya Rotista is another one that I got in a plant trade. How amazing is that? Very similar to a couple of other Hoyas I'm going to show you in a second. This one hasn't done a lot of growing for me in that time, but right now you can see we have some new growth here where it's a little bit red. So exciting times to grow this one and to see where it takes us. I haven't had any peduncles from this thing yet. It's been quite small, quite a slow grower for me, but hopefully it takes off. I imagine the growth pattern is going to be very similar to the Hoya Bella. Perhaps, I'm not quite sure. If you know, let me know in the comments below. If you know what the peduncles are like as well, do share that in the comments, because I would love to know what to expect as I grow this plant more in the future. The Hoya Phuwuaensis. One of the things I really love about this plant is the name Phuwuaensis. It just feels so I love it. This plant is the most cardboardy plant of them all. This thing is tougher than cardboard. It's like, it's almost impossible to even bend this plant. So that is something I really like about this plant. The fact that, again, this one loves to put out a peduncle as well. The peduncles are really interesting. They're quite simple but elegant at the same time, and I think it's a lot like the growth of this plant. I think I've sort of trellised it the wrong way over here, which is why it sort of started to not grow any leaves. But despite that, you can see that we have some peduncles here. Where else? There's a long one over here as well, which is quite cool. And yeah, we have loads of peduncles on this plant. Wouldn't it be great if they all came into bloom at the same time? How amazing would that look? Personally, I think it will look pretty cool, so I'm looking forward to that. Just such a cool plant, really cool. Now that this plant is in its growing phase, I may consider moving it out of leca into something else. I'm not quite sure what yet. This plant hasn't had any issues as far as I'm concerned. It's grown pretty steady since I've had it, but I think it's worth sort of trying to improve the growing situation for this plant, just so that it can really have an opportunity to really fill out, especially this side of the plant, really fill out and look like something, rather than just from this edge where it looks really cool, but then it's like the dark side of the moon, isn't it? But yes, the Hoya Phuwuaensis, to me, it's not a plant that comes up for sale very often. I wouldn't say it's particularly pricey where I am anyway. So if you can get your hands on one, make sure you do, because it's unique, it's different, and also if you're a sucker for splashing, oh, look at that. Look at it. It just screams elegance, this plant. It really does. This is the Hoya Parasita Black Edge, and although last time I showed it to you, it probably looked about the same in terms of the size of it. What is different is that rootage. Look at all of those roots. I had this thing growing in a greenhouse for a little while, and it was just growing out roots non-stop. So I mean, I'm going to try to repot this today, because it's only sitting in some moss and in a very small pot. So I'll try my best to sort of get into something a bit larger, and also with some soil perhaps, just so it can get that nutrients that it really desperately needs, because it looks like it's a plant that wants to grow. It wants to be really bushy and thick, and I just think the moss in here isn't quite cutting it. But another thing I really like about this plant is the fact that when the leaves start to come in, if I show you this one over here, it has really interesting texture. It almost reminds me of a little bit of like a turtle back, just with the way that the veins come in. So that's really interesting. And when you really pay close attention to this plant, you can see where it gets its name from, that black edge that runs along the border of the plants. This plant, I think I need to do something with it. I think it can be a standout plant in my collection if I'm able to get it to grow really big and bushy. It can be something special, I believe. So that's something I'm hoping to do this summer, is to really get this one to position, really challenge some of the other ones in my collection. This is the Hoya Rotundiflora, another interesting plant. Really reminds me of the Villosa, just because of the way the leaves grow. It's got that sort of, that round-ish kind of shape. This one is ever so slightly fuzzy, just the slightest fuzz. It's not much, just a little bit. Done okay. It hasn't grown tremendously since I've had it. Perhaps it's the substrate that it's in. It's in a moss and perlite mix of some sort. I think I need to upgrade this, because since I've had it, I haven't done much with it other than just trying to get it to acclimate, and I think it's ready for something different. The other plant that it shares the pot with, which is this one, the Sigillatis, isn't doing as well though. It's only got one leaf when I got it. I think it had a few more than this, maybe 2 or 3, and it's dropped those, and we're left with just that sort of that base leaves. I need to sort something out with this plant sooner rather than later. There's not really much I can say about these plants just yet. I have some real focus on my Hoya game this year, just to make sure that they really get the most out of life, and I can really get them to grow really, really well, really bushy. So fingers crossed that happens for these plants, especially the Sigillatis, because it's such a cool little plant, just very different. That sort of that long leaf and extreme variegation as well. I think, what more can you ask for in a plant? The Hoya Parviflora is another plant that I got around the same time as the last few that I've shown you at that plant trade. Yeah, really cool. There's not really much again to say about this plant. I haven't done much with it, and then the plant is quite steady. I haven't lost any leaves on this. Equally, the plant hasn't grown any new leaves, so I need to sort something out with this plant. I did try to wrap it around itself in the pot so that the plant could root. I don't think it has rooted, which is unfortunate, but maybe it's just time to trellis this plant up so that it can continue to grow. Maybe that's what it wants. It wants to grow up as opposed to growing around. So Parviflora, another interesting plant. It's got those long leaves, much like some of the other plants I've showed you earlier today. The only thing is that this one's got a lot of splashing on it. So what I want to do is give it some really bright light, just to sort of encourage that variegation, and also see what a bit of sun stressing does to this plant. I think it could be quite interesting. And finally, this Hoya, and unfortunately I've misplaced the label, so I'm going to need your help here to help me identify this Hoya. This is one of those ones that grows quite flat, and I imagine if it grows up a tree, it sort of almost sticks to the tree and grows really close to the surface. And you can see the growth pattern here. Although we have a couple of leaves, we've got actually 3 leaves here. The plant is really holding close to the ground. Now, when I first got this plant, I had zero hope that this plant was going to make it, because it barely had a stem to be rooted. But I grew it in a close just to sort of see if I could get any growth going, and I did, and I'm quite happy with that. And since it's put out 2 new leaves and a couple of tendrils. So this tendril is new, as well as this little one down here as well. So there's still time to sort of get this thing growing. I think this one is definitely going to need some sort of, maybe not a moss pole, but perhaps like a cork bark or something like that, just so that it can wrap itself around as it grows. But for now, I'm going to leave it as it is, just to sort of continue to putting out some new leaves, so I know that it's really well established. Once it is, I can then put it into something really interesting. And imagine how cool that would be, have a bark with these leaves just tightly wrapped around it growing up. I think that would look pretty impressive. So please do let me know in the comments below if you know the name of this plant. Be super grateful, and I'll make sure that I put the name in here and I don't lose it again. So those are all of the Hoyas that I am caring for at the moment, and I'll link my previous video in the cards so that you can see what the previous collection was like and how far these plants have come. You'll also notice that unfortunately we have lost 1 or 2 over the winter months, which is a real shame. It's really unfortunate, but you got to roll with the punches sometimes in this plant game, and it's all about sort of improving and learning, and I've learned quite a lot. I think next year I'm going to have to invest in some sort of heat mat, because the winters are getting colder, unfortunate, and the summers are getting hotter, and that transition for a lot of these plants can be quite tough. So I think I might have to do that. The cost of living as it is and the price of energy might just be worth just trying as much to avoid that, but we'll see. But let me know what you think of my Hoya collection. Do let me know if there's any that you've seen that you would like to add to your collection, and if you have any that you think I should add to my collection. It's a little bit smaller now, so I do have space to add a few more, so I'd love to hear any recommendations. But that's all for now, and as always, keep planting.